Do you have any theories on the interaction between, some people call it the law of attraction, and you're talking about, there's a lot of overlap here with imagination and the idea that thoughts become things. We know that our brain it emits various electrical frequencies at different frequencies and different amplitudes. Do you see a common thread tying all of this together? Mm-hmm. From a scientific perspective, and then from a more esoteric perspective?
Yeah, it's a really important and interesting question. I realized, though, before I answer your question, that I didn't answer your previous question in a succinct way. So before I answer, just really quickly, if I may, you asked whether or not the fake it before you make it is important. Oh, yeah. I do think that your nervous system can be tricked. And if you trick it, it can, by imagining, like let's say I imagine that I always speak conversational French. Well, now I'm no better off than I was a second ago, but it can serve as an important incentive role. And so in that sense, yes, you just have to deal with the potential fear of failure. But then again, you can use fear in order to accomplish a goal also. Okay. So to take your question, so you're asking whether or not there's sort of if I understand correctly, you're asking whether or not there are interactions between two separate nervous systems, yours and mine, that can explain some of the more mysterious things that have been, that people have reported throughout history or even recently.
Interactions between two nervous systems, but also our brains as an organ that emits electrical frequencies at various amplitudes based on the thoughts we're thinking and different things going on in our body, our health and vitality, and how that interacts with the world around us.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great, high level, kind of new agey question. I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, not afraid to go at that question. I'll just tell you right now, I mean, my more, I would say, rigid scientific colleagues would probably at this point start to say, oh boy, I wonder where he's going to come up with this one. But it's interesting because this, I think, is at the essence of what we all should be thinking about often, if not all the time, which is about the evolution of humanity. If one person's thoughts and behaviors, or just even thoughts, as you're saying, are influencing the people around us positively or negatively, or not. Let's say that it's not. We want an answer to that. It's hard to disprove something, but so I can't disprove that's not, that it's happening. But the short answer for me is yes. And I think that there are ways that we've experienced this on a more subtle level. If you've ever been to a just really awesome concert, and that could be a huge concert of 10,000 people, or you've been in a small jazz club and heard an amazing piece of music, an amazing riff, or you went to the symphony, or you heard an incredible piece of opera and you're transported someplace else. That is explainable at some level in kind of abstract terms. We don't have a mechanism, but the performer's ability to transform our thinking and our imagination into a different location. You sort of leave your seat. You're not at that concert jumping up and down on that, sort of beer-stained floor. You're engaging in something collectively with a bunch of people, listening to the music, and you're all entranced or kind of somewhat hypnotized by that common rhythm or beat or melody or piece of music or beautiful sounding voice. So in that sense, we know that our senses can engage one another. And so a kind of simple example of an absolute yes to your question is a beautiful piece of music sung to me that sound waves enter my nervous system. I hear them and they take me someplace else. Now, here's another example. Fingernails on a chalkboard, I probably don't even have to make the sound, and you can immediately feel the cringe that comes from a kind of sensory, like this is a defensive behavior people make when you think about, like fingers on a chalkboard. Or if you tell people who are afraid of sharks about going in the ocean, imagine Jaws coming at you, they immediately engage in those behaviors. Those are, all I did was describe it. So you're saying, what about if you just felt something? Well, you just felt something. You didn't even say anything, sing anything, or tell me about or put fingernails on a chalkboard. Could you influence my thinking? And to me, it's an absolute yes. Why? Well, let's say you're suddenly in a very anxious state. Okay, you seem like a very calm guy, very secure in your place. But let's say you were suddenly
enjoying the conversation.
Okay, well, thank you. Let's say you were in a very anxious state. I might perceive that by, how dilated your pupils are, how much you might be perspiring and so forth. Maybe even, but those would be more or less conscious things if I'm looking at them or seeing them. But there are other things like the cadence of your voice. Okay, now let's start removing those one by one and ask, if you were just sitting in a chair feeling anxious, would I be able to feel it? That's kind of what you're asking. So I'm using kind of a negative example of anxiety. And my answer is yes, because our brains are these incredible maps and learning machines, but they also have this incredibly primitive circuitry that's designed to make sure that I breathe, circuitry that's designed to make sure that my heart still beats. Don't want that to fail, that my digestion is working. I'm not conscious of this, but also circuitry that's paying careful attention to the other nervous systems in the environment and where they're at in terms of their anxiety level, aggression level. I don't have to hear you give a battle cry or a roar to know whether or not you're in an aggressive state. If you've ever sat next to somebody who is feeling really anxious, and you're not even looking at them, let's say in a doctor's office, you can almost perceive their anxiety. Now, some people, I believe, are more tuned into this kind of primitive energy. Now, when we start talking about energy, then you're really in kind of in the new age domain. But when I talk about energy, I'm talking about, you asked the question beautifully, electrical signals. That's the language of the nervous system. The nervous system, which are neurons and glia and some other cell types too, blood vessels and stuff, communicate through electrical signals. And from those electrical signals, create these ideas that this is a conversation, that I can understand your words. Those are just ideas that come from electrical signals. So if you're sitting there and you're feeling very anxious or very aggressive, and I remove let's say we have a wall between us, a thin wall, and I can't see you, and I can't hear you, but these electrical signals can pass through. The question is, are there areas of my brain that are responding to those and registering how the other organisms in my environment are feeling? And I believe, and this is a belief, I don't have scientific proof, that it's yes. It has to be yes. Because so much of what drove evolution, so much of what drove human and animal development was the ability to perceive what other creatures in our environment are thinking and doing and perceiving without having to go over and test, like, hey, are you feeling aggressive? Poking you. That's a bad idea in a very ancient kind of tribal society with limited resources of just fire and, one bear out there that we need to kill, hunters and gatherers. So I'm absolutely sure that the circuitry is there, that it's very primitive, and it's somewhat suppressed by our ability to think. I just say, Anthony, how you feeling today? You all right? And you say, yeah, I'm feeling pretty good. I don't know, I'm a little tired from the night before or something like that. Or I feel great. And I think, oh, well, okay. You can also perceive, let's use a positive example, when someone is feeling fantastically well. I really believe that health, I believe, is communicated between organisms. Now, dogs and humans are a kind of fun example to think about this. Dogs don't have a lot of heavy thinking, planning machinery. I've got a 90-pound English bulldog, Costello. Costello didn't wake up on New Year's Day 2016 and say, you know what? This year, 60 rabbits. I'm going to catch 60 rabbits. But you can bet every time he sees a rabbit, he takes off after it. So he's not good at the goal-setting planning thing, but dogs and humans have this remarkable ability to kind of understand where each other are at. And the dogs are actually much better at understanding where our energies are. And great dog trainers, animal trainers of all kinds, can perceive where their owners are kind of feeling, if they're anxious or not. Children are remarkably good at knowing if their parents are paying attention or not. Right? Whether or not they're anxious or not. They're internalizing those signals, but the kids, because their cortex isn't that well developed, they don't sit there and they think, wow, mom's feeling kind of anxious or dad's feeling kind of anxious. I guess they had a hard day at work today. Not at all. That's why they continue to do things like kick the back of your seat or try and extract attention or ignore us. So these mechanisms are there. And they're primitive, they're somewhat suppressed, and meaning they're kind of overshadowed by our thoughts. But throughout history, there have been people that have been more tapped into that kind of energy. And when I say energy, those kinds of neural signals. In the same way that a very, very skilled musician can listen to a piece of music and say, you know what, that one note was off, or gosh, that was exactly right on point. Whereas I'm not a skilled musician, I have a poor ear, and someone can be off by quite a bit before I'd say, ooh, that kind of, not so good, or wow, perfect. So there are going to be people that they have a highly tuned and evolved sense of these things. And I think we should be paying attention to those people, and we should be studying them. And for those of you out there that feel that you're more in tune with those senses, you probably are. We just don't really have a mechanism to provide, at this point.
it's hard to bring a tangible component to those things. One of the things I've found really fun with the book and some of the stuff that we got to explore for that was things like audiovisual entrainment and using pulsating lights and sound frequencies to bring the brain into a specific wavelength, whether that's delta if you're trying to achieve sleep, or beta if you're trying to concentrate, alpha if you're trying to mimic some of the benefits of meditation. And so we know that the brain has a tendency to entrain to the dominant external stimulus, whether that's visual, whether that's auditory, whether that's even now pulsed electromagnetic fields and some of those machines that have exploded in popularity. It makes sense to me that the brain being an electrical device, if we know that we entrain to a PEMF machine, and that's electrical, we know that our brain responds to visual stimulation and auditory stimulation, why couldn't it also entrain to another human being? Whereas if you're thinking about your goals and you're emitting positive energy and frequency, that there's a greater likelihood that I'm going to align with your goals and perhaps help facilitate the achievement of them, or feed off of that energy. So I went off on a little bit of a tangent.
No, I think you're illustrating a really important point for anyone that wants to improve learning or their brain or biohacking or improve their biology. It's these behavioral modification studies, or just anecdotally, are really interesting. I sometimes go to meetings where there's a big buffet, and if I tend to eat pretty healthy because it makes me feel good, and that's what I like. I'm human. I lapse every once in a while, and I enjoy those lapses tremendously, by the way. But it's interesting when you eat healthy. People tend to say that you notice they start doing the same thing. That's just a behavioral observation. And from the standpoint of a brain, so if I put my really nerdy hat on, I'd say, what is the behavior? Behavior is a bunch of motor neurons engaging different muscles and picking the vegetables instead of the sweets. Okay, so that's just behavior that people are, it's just electrical signals, and you've got some knowledge about what certain choices mean and what other choices mean. So what you're asking is, could this work at a level where we just don't communicate verbally or behaviorally, or in writing? And I absolutely feel the answer is yes. I love that thing about, you're the product of the 5 people that you're surrounded by and their goals. Some of that is loftier goal setting. For me, being out here with you guys, with Russell and you, it's clear, you guys think big, you go big, and that's inspiring, right? Now, and inspiration is the idea that, if I wanted to do something, that maybe I could do it too, in my domain or a similar domain, maybe even the same domain. I'm not going to try and wrestle either of you. Although I'd like to.
He's the wrestler.
So all right,
I'm the wrestling dummy.
Exactly. So fitness-wise, I'll be happy if I can keep my own. Although I'd love to go for a run and test that theory. But in any case, I think the idea that positive thoughts, or what some people refer to as frames, can influence one another is I believe that's an absolute truth. And for any of people out there who are doubters, skeptics and naysayers, hang around with a bunch of negative people or depressed people for a while. They don't have to say anything. It's depressing. Hang around with people that are positively motivated, and always people think that there's kind of this shunning of positive people sometimes, in cultures or even in families or in groups where negative is encouraged. That's why, we should be sensitive to depression. It's often a disease. People commit suicide if it gets severe enough. So I'm sensitive to that, but I'm also sensitive to the fact that the nervous system is not iron and brick. The nervous system is this highly adaptable machinery that's designed to communicate between one another in the world. So much of your brain is devoted to social communication. And we know this exists with animals. There's incredible example, I think I'm going to get the pronunciation wrong, but Temple Grandin, the woman who developed all these incredible enhanced because they made the animals happier, farming methods of how the cows needed to run in all these cattle ranches, who's autistic. Her brain is not very plugged into certain kinds of analysis that we're all familiar with that engage normal social interaction, but she's extremely tuned in to what animals are perceiving and feeling. And the cows don't talk, at least not a language we can understand. So there's definitely something there. And I don't think, I have no shame about discussing these things, because to me, somewhere there's a mechanism. And I'll just mention one, which is that you have your olfactory bulb. This is a very evolved structure. You can smell things in the environment. If I tell you, close your eyes and imagine the smell of chocolate chip cookies baking in the oven, you can get kind of an essence of it. Now, you also have
It's a bad example when we haven't eaten lunch.
No, right, that one. All right, so a nice healthy ribeye steak or, a salad or something. Salad doesn't have as much of an odor to humans, but you get the picture. Whereas if I say, well, what about the things you can't smell that are impacting your olfactory system that make you do things? These are pheromone effects, highly evolved in animals, right? Pheromone effects are very strong in terms of mate selection. In humans too, these are very powerful studies that, for instance, the ability for women to detect at a subconscious level the t-shirt of their partner or their husband among literally hundreds of other t-shirts where the smell was identical, but somehow they just know the one that belongs to him. That's a pheromone effect. Or the women's synchronization of their menstrual cycles when they all are housed in dormitories together. Those are pheromone effects. But they're very powerful, and they're a carryover from evolution, from animals and more primitive forms of human beings. And there's something in the human brain, in the human nose, called Jacobson's organ, which is very regressed. That's the part of the nose of the olfactory system that responds to pheromones. In animals, they have something called the accessory olfactory bulb. The name isn't important, but it's not responsible for conscious perception of smells. It's the thing that dogs are smelling around, and they're smelling what's there, but they're really smelling how powerful was the dog that was here before in the hierarchy of dogs. My dog Costello thinks he's at the top of the chain. Occasionally there's another dog that challenges him there, but it's all through the nose. We're very visual, we're very auditory driven, and we're very tactile. Animals are much more olfactory. So they're exchanging energy, to use that phraseology, but just nervous system energy, neural energy, which are electrical signals, at a subconscious level. They're not aware. Women aren't aware that they have of a certain odor that allows their menstrual cycle to align with the menstrual cycle of other women in their environment. But that's a very powerful effect. And ask any woman who's been housed in a dormitory or spent time with female friends, isolated from men especially, and you'll see that, and they'll report, yeah, that's a very strong effect of the synchronization of menstrual cycles, which is hormonal, it's endocrine, it's a number of different things. So these things are there. We've just kind of overridden them with thoughts and behaviors, but they can be detected and studied if someone were interested.
We're going to dive in just a minute into some of the specific strategies that you utilize that are supported in the scientific literature, and some that are kind of on the forefront of biohacking for upgrading cognitive function. And you've touched on a few with sensory deprivation tanks and meditation, and we've talked a lot offline. Before we do that, what do you do when you find yourself dealing with negative thoughts, or we can even call them unproductive thoughts?
Yeah. Well, those happen, right? I'm human, and it's my brain's job to occasionally generate those thoughts. So I'm aware of that. They're not evil. They're not bad.
And just hearing this, I hear acceptance.
Yeah. So okay. So this all circles back to this principle that I kind of mentioned at the beginning, that your brain is an organ. So you guys might laugh at this, but this is very powerful for me. When I wake up in the morning, in addition to being grateful, and I do believe in, I am grateful every morning I wake up healthy, and mobile and breathing and ambulatory. That's a lot. If you've ever had those compromised, that's a lot. So wake up. The first thing I think of is how to get my thoughts emotionally healthy. And this is something that other people have talked about. Certainly Tony Robbins has talked about this, other people have talked about, but emotional health is critical. We are, so it's typical for my answers. I'm going to take a little bit of a roundabout and then arrive at an answer to your question. So, as a culture, we're so comfortable nowadays with going to gyms, eating well, supplements, and all this stuff. Trainers, looking to experts for how to take care of our bodies and our health. 10, 20 years ago, I got into the weight training game early when the only people who went to gyms were bodybuilders. You walked in there and it was like, and it was rare to see women in gyms. Now almost everyone has a gym membership or feels like they should, right? And they probably should at some level to keep themselves healthy. We don't think a lot about emotional health. You don't see, and that's what's wonderful about what you guys are doing with biohacking and, in general, neurohacking as a movement. We don't see a lot about emotional health. But I wake up in the morning aware that just like it would be unhealthy for me to smoke a cigarette, drink a glass of whiskey, and eat a bunch of bagel and bacon and whatever it is, which is not those are not healthy activities for my body. I'm aware that there's the capacity to wake up and have unhealthy thoughts, and unhealthy thoughts can take various forms. But for me, it means that I have to do something positive in its place, right? So the first thing I do when I wake up in the morning is I tell myself that everything I do, everything I've ever done, and everything I'll ever will do is generated by this incredible organ in my head called the brain. And I'm a nervous system. That's what I am, right? I'm a nervous system that can generate feelings, thoughts, perceptions, behaviors. And some of those that come from external stimuli, and some I'm going to generate. So what am I going to generate? I'm going to start just like people want to start their day. Some people fast for breakfast. I'm now on that movement. I think it's great for certain people. Certainly has been for me. But the first thing you put into your body as an ingestible food is hopefully going to be something that's nourishing and good for your body and your health. The first thoughts I have, I want control of those. I'm not going to be force feeding myself negative thoughts, and I certainly don't want to be force fed negative thoughts by somebody else. Right? So careful not to do that. So the first thoughts, I start off not with affirmations, which I think are wonderful, but just from this recognition that my brain is an organ that has the capacity to generate negative thoughts or positive thoughts. Think about it like a buffet where there's food that's clearly bad for you and food that's great for you. Now you have a choice. So just the acceptance that there's a lot of things on the buffet table, good thoughts, bad thoughts, and everything in between, and that it's a buffet and I have the choice. Now I dictate the terms. And that's where I start to feel a real sense of volition or a command of what I'm going to do. And so the first thing I like to do each day is to make sure that I anchor. For me, it's anchoring either in breathing or in thoughts or in both. So I do 5 minutes and just 5 minutes. I know you guys recommend this in your book. And we didn't align on that previously. It was kind of interesting. You asked me about that. Do I do any behaviors like this to anchor my thoughts in a positive sense? I meditate, and I have for decades now, 5 minutes a day. And my meditation is simple. I just concentrate on my breath. I try and stay concentrated on my breath. I think it's very powerful for enhancing concentration overall throughout the day. Makes you less reactive. And as I do that, I think about what comes up. Am I having negative thoughts? Am I kind of neutral, or am I positive? And I actually give myself a score. 1 would be, and I'm really down in the dumps, or I'm ruminating, I'm kind of obsessing about something negative. 10 would be, I'm so psyched that I can barely think about my breathing because I'm so excited about what I'm gonna do today. I wanna be right about a 5 or a 6. I kind of wanna enter my day calm, aware, I wanna take in new things in a good state. But at that point in the day, I'm not interested in being like euphoric, nor am I interested in being down in the dumps. But I am interested in reminding myself. And this is just a simple biohack anyone can do. You just remind yourself that you're in control, that your brain is a nervous system and you're in control, right? And knowing that, just in the same way that I'm not worried that my hands are suddenly gonna reach out and slap you in the face or grab those pens and eat them, I also don't have to be worried about if a negative thought comes up that I need to do anything about it, right? So once I have that in place, and those to me are very powerful biohacks, this sort of recognition of self as in control, and then to gauge where one is, and then to really say, you know what, I'm gonna have to take some active control today perhaps to kind of push away the negative stuff and feed myself positive stuff. And there are a number of hacks we could talk about how to increase positive stuff, how to push away negative stuff, but that's how I do it.
Yeah.